Who? Evan. She did? Oh.
Evelyn something else. Thursday night, Thanksgiving night.
Wow.
Was she home alone or?
No, her daughter was there.
Really?
Her daughter, whatever, she was on the floor. And her medicine was underneath.
Oh.
Laid out on the floor.
Yeah, I saw that, and, well, I got in touch with you, but,
So I think it's part of I didn't know that was his step.
I know that every time she went out of town, she would always tell me to go over and we can help. She said, Willie was over there, he would go, he would out there too.
How you doing? I just checked with you. Yeah, still got 2 minutes, if that helps.
You do prayer for her? Did you have anything?
Yes, there's, contract for the wastewater plant lab. They do culture. We're doing it.
We do quotes, like what we contract out.
Yeah, we request both free professional service, so we don't have to. Pretty much the same as the project.
I know that,
Last year, I
parking, I mean, if I use.
so a few years ago, I talked to Dan about it. But there was
Was his daughter out of the house? She died?
That's
She
This one guy came up with.
So her daughter's fine.
Thanks.
Lexipol stock line the items that we wanted to remove, obviously, struck in red. The reason that we looked to strike the majority of was the concern that with us using a program called LadTech, with us using a couple of the other web-based programs.
Oh,
we felt
okay,
that
I just
way
wrote that.
Lexipol worded stuff,
But I never thought to send it on to.
it set
Yeah, I
guys
sent it
up
on.
for the concern that
She sent it, but I didn't.
their personal.
No, I just wrote things. I was shorting out.
Used against them, and I think you and I had this conversation before, where there are personal phones or there's.
Okay, we're gonna get started here.
Yeah, to the extent of what's on there, what it's.
Okay, before we get started, as usual, make sure you speak slowly and into the microphone. Okay, we're gonna start our committee meetings. This is Barton City Council, November 30th, 2020. The first committee we're going to have report is City Properties, Parks and Recreation with Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's the call to order City Properties, Parks and Recreation. It is Monday, November 30th, 2020, 6 p.m. at the Active Adult Center. All members present, all council present, plus guests noted. We have 0 requests for legislation or miscellaneous discussion. I open it with the Barberton Parks Commission. First off, will not meet this Thursday. Second off, the Parks and Recreation Department is going to be holding a toy drive to benefit children in the community who could use some extra joy this Christmas. All councils received flyers. Kara Lasenko with the Parks Department will be the contact for it. They've partnered with Barberton City Schools to help identify children that may need a little extra hand this holiday season and have personal gift requests. The goal is to have children sponsored by individuals or businesses from no more than $25, and the business will be listed with the thank you note on the Facebook page and in the Barberton Herald. With that, does anybody have anything else for discussion?
I do.
Mr. President?
I'd just like to say how great the lake looks. A lot of those bulbs have been replaced with LED lighting. You can really tell the difference. And, and I know it's not the cheapest thing. As far as I know, each bulb's $1, so. But it's worth it. It looks really good. And I know it's a long time coming, but good things happen to those who wait. Appreciate it. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Anything else from anyone? Hearing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you. We are adjourned at 6:02.
Thank you very much. Next up is Public Welfare and Safety, Mrs. DeBette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring to order the Public Welfare and Safety meeting. It's Monday, November 30th, 2020, here in the Active Adult Center. It's 6:04 p.m. All members of the committee are present, as well as all other council members and all others noted. We have no new requests for legislation, but we do have a piece of legislation that we will be voting on this evening. It's ordinance number 150, 2020, titled Disposal of Vehicles, Police Department. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? Okay. Does anyone have any miscellaneous discussion for safety this evening? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Mr. Greer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Griffin. We are adjourned at 6:05 p.m.
Thank you. Next up is Rules, Marketing, and Development with Mr. Griffin.
Rules, Marketing, and Development, I would like to call this meeting to order today, November 30th. We are meeting remotely and in the Active Adult Center, all members present and all others as noted. Tonight, we have no requests for legislation. Do we have any discussion, miscellaneous discussion on anything for rules? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Height.
I'll second that, sir.
Thank you. David, we're adjourned at 6:05.
Okay, thank you. Next up is City Utilities with Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to call the city utilities on November 30th in the Active Adult Center. All members are present, along with others as noted. We have current legislation, ordinance number 149, 2020, titled Enter into Contract, MTech Company McNear for the truck that we have discussed. We have any other discussion on that? We've talked about this twice. Hearing none, we have a request for legislation, a letter from Mr. Tracy requesting legislation to allow the mayor to amend the electric supply agreement with Energy Harbor. Energy Harbor submitted the lowest rate formulation via request for proposal. The new rate will be 0.497 kilowatt hours, and it's the lowest rate the city has ever received through the aggregation program, and the first time the rate has been below 0.5 kilowatt hours. Anyone have any questions about that? Hearing none, do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a motion. I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Second, we have a letter from Mr. Weaver requesting legislation to enter into a 2-year contract with Ring and Hager Environmental Laboratories Incorporated for analytical services in 2021 and 2022. The industrial pre-treatment program, Barberton POTW and Norton Package plants are required to have an outside consultant for analytical evaluations. 3 laboratories were solicited for services: Riemann Hager, Alloway, and CWM Environmental Cleveland LLC. Riemann Hager is the lowest in price on the majority of parameters listed and has provided excellent service in the past. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Weaver on this? Mrs. Debevick.
Mr. Weaver, so they weren't the lowest bid, they were just the lower in several areas.
Well, they are the overall lowest.
They are the overall lowest?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, when you add up all of everything that they're gonna run, all the parameters and the frequency of them, they're lower. And there's a spreadsheet on there that shows, for the total, CWM was like $437, like per round. Riemann Hager was $277. And Alway had $272 on, and that was for the pre-treatment, so it was just $5 lower. But when you added in all of the, all the other parameters, Riemann and Hager was lower by the time we added in the plant. So they were very, very close.
And all those parameters are necessary that they had, was there?
Yes, it's, this was mainly compliance for the treatment plant, our compliance parameters that we send out. Many of them we run ourselves, but we don't run a full lab for a number of years. We'll run things like DOD and COD, suspended solids, pHs, things, but for metals and things like ammonia, those we'll send out. Oil and grease.
Is Riemann Hager a local company?
I'm not sure where they're located. None of them are located in Barberton, but all of them pick up. They come and pick up the samples. And we get the results through the email.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Heidick?
Yes, is it for miscellaneous discussion, were you asking?
On this, before we take our vote. Do I have a motion to call for this? Oh, do you have a question?
No, I'm making a motion.
Okay, you're making the motion.
Yeah.
Do I have a second?
I will second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now it's miscellaneous discussion. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Tracy, with the Energy Harbor contract, it says 4 years. if something happens within those 4 years, do we just send it out for a bid again? Because Energy Harbor is the owner of those nuclear plants that are embattled in that bailout. So if something happens to them, do we just send it out again for bid?
The consultant felt confident that Energy Harbor wouldn't have any problems being a supplier for 4 years, and that they have enough capital and liquidity that it's not an issue. So I don't know the answer to your specific question. My assumption would be if they're not a supplier anymore, then we would have to rebid everything.
Okay.
Because then the contract is voided if they can't supply.
Thank you.
Any other questions for utilities? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion. I will second it.
Motion made by Carol Fry and seconded by Carla DeVitt. We are adjourned at 6:12.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Finance and Personnel, Ms. Fry.
All right, it is Monday, November 30th. The time is 6:15 PM. We are in the Active Adult Center, and we are going to begin the Finance and Personnel Committee meeting. All members of the committee are present, as well as all council members and guests as noted on my meeting sheet. Tonight, the topics of discussion will be that we have several pieces of current legislation that we'll be voting on. The first is ordinance number 151, 2020, and this is an appropriation for the fire department. And this appropriation is for a new air, hang on, let me get the right word for it. Air handling system. And it has an ionization component to it. And it is to replace the HVAC in the main fire department and for an ionization unit for the State Street Fire Department. And this particular piece of legislation is an appropriation in the amount of $31,079 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the fire department capital fund of the general fund. And this is not grant money, and it is not COVID money. It is just coming out of the general fund for this particular air handling system. Are there any questions about this? Okay. Hearing none, we'll go on to the second piece of legislation, which is ordinance number 152, 2020, titled Amending Ordinance Number 175-1995. This is in regard to our emergency reserve fund for public facilities and programs. And currently, the emergency reserve fund has a maximum amount of $1 million, and we want to change that to $2 million. And one of the reasons behind this is the fact that we have COVID money, and if there are any problems with any of the ways in which we have used the money, we will have money in the reserve fund in order to send the money back to the government. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation. Okay. On to the third ordinance that we will be voting on tonight, which is ordinance number 153-2020. This is an appropriation for the law department, and it is in the amount of $23,000. And this appropriation is coming from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the law department's operating budget of the general fund and declaring an emergency. And this particular appropriation is for a couple of different things. One in the amount of $5,000 for office furniture and what have you, and $18,000 towards some legal work that we are involved in. Do I have any questions about that? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. All right, now I'm gonna open up for any miscellaneous discussion. Does anybody have any miscellaneous discussion in regard to finance or personnel? Okay. Beth? Mrs.
Just want to
Doherty?
bring up the COVID situation within the city, the state, the country, it's just going crazy, and we all know that. So the city and municipal building may be going to a reduced workforce, or having some employees work from home if they can. That's what the governor is asking us for. I was in over the weekend to dust off some of those policies in anticipation of this happening. So I'll be sending out emails to department heads to make those decisions. And it's not a reduction in force necessarily, it's a work from home. So we can't afford to give out paid administrative leave again like we did in the spring. But we will still try to stagger schedules and have folks work from home. So if you could please be preparing to call the departments and maybe, it doesn't get picked up right away. Send out emails as you normally would, and certainly call, but just understand that we might be having some folks working from home.
Okay, thank you. For, if that didn't resonate through the sound system, Mrs. Doherty, our safety director, informed us that we are, due to the COVID and the latest outbreak, that some of our employees are going to be working from home and schedules are going to be staggered. So not as many people are in the city building at the same time. And she is going to send all of us an email to that effect. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none, and no other topics for discussion. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn? Okay, motion made by Mrs. Angeloff. Seconded by Mrs. Bedevic, and we are adjourned at 6:21 p.m.
Okay, we're gonna go right into our meetings as we get Renee back here. Okay, this is a regular legislative meeting of the Barberton City Council. Today is Monday, November 30th, 2020. It is 6:22 p.m. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by myself. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, after the prayer, please remain standing for a moment of silence for Evelyn Fennell, a longtime Barber resident who was very active in the city goings. Dear Heavenly Father, we are here to make decisions for our community. May we use only our best skills and judgment in keeping ourselves impartial and neutral as we consider the merits and pitfalls of each matter that is placed before us. And may we always act in accordance with what is best for our community and our citizens. Amen. Okay, thank you very much. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Bowen.
Here.
Mrs. Levitt.
Here.
Mrs. Frye.
Here.
Mr. Greer.
Present.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Heidi.
Here.
Mr. Taylor.
Here.
Okay, Council Rule 103 states that a regular and committee of the whole meeting shall be at 7:30 p.m. Since we are starting earlier than this, we will need to invoke Council Rule 702. Mrs. Levitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103.
Thank you, and Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to invoke 702 to suspend 103.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Heidi to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay, approval of the minutes and regular legislative meeting. Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, November 16th, 2020, as presented.
Thank you, and Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second her motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Motion, it was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Heidi to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, November 16th, 2020, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. Approval of the minutes of the executive session. Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the executive session held on Monday, November 23rd, 2020, as presented.
Thank you, and Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to approve the minutes of the executive session.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mr. Heidi to approve the minutes of the executive session held on Monday, November 23rd, 2020, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. Petitions and claims.
There are none.
Matters requested.
They've been passed out.
Citizens addressing council.
I did not receive any.
Thank you. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 147, 2020, presented by Mrs. Angela, titled amending Barberton Codified Ordinances, Chapter 670, Trees, Weeds, and Grass, Chapter 1422, Registration in General, and Chapter 1444, Permits and Fees. An ordinance amending Section 670.02, removal of weeds by owner or occupant, 5 days notice, ordinance number 49, 2013. Section 1422.04, registration fees, insurance, which is ordinance number 32, 2011, and section 1444.15, general permit fees, ordinance number 146-2016. That's the first reading only. Ordinance number 148-2020, presented by Mrs. Angela, titled amending environment codified ordinances, chapter 1478, rental property registration program. An ordinance amending section 1478, and registration required, ordinance number 65-2001. And that's the first reading only. Ordinance number 149-2020, presented by Mrs. Coburn, titled enter into contract, MTech Company Maintainer. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into contract with MTech Company Maintainer through the purchase of a utility service truck in the water distribution garage in the amount of $134,799 through the Ohio State Cooperative Purchasing Program pursuant to ordinance number 1995, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that for the adoption of ordinance 149-2020.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 149-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Ordinance number 150-2020, presented by Mrs. Devitt, titled disposal of vehicles, police department. An ordinance authorizing the police chief to scrap salvage 24 vehicles deemed to be no longer needed for any municipal purpose and unfit and unsafe for disposal in any other manner, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 150-2020.
Thank you. And Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion for the adoption of ordinance number 150-2020.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to adopt ordinance number 150-2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Chambers,
Yes.
Mr. Heidi,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Ordinance number 151, presented by Mrs. Fry, title appropriation fire department. An ordinance appropriating $31,079 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the fire department capital fund of the general fund for the purchase of a complete air handling system and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Levitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Fodor?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 151-2020.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to adopt ordinance number 151, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Mrs. Fodor?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Ordinance number 152, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, title amending ordinance 175, 1995, emergency reserve fund for public facility programs. An ordinance amending ordinance number 175, 1995, by increasing maximum amount allowed in the emergency reserve fund to $2 million and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rules as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Fodor?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 152, 2020.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to adopt ordinance number 152, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mrs. Fodor?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Ordinance number 153, 2020, presented by Mrs. Frye, title appropriation law department. An ordinance appropriating $23,000 from the unincorporated item of the general fund to the law department's operating budget of the general fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Mrs. Fodor?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Frye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 153, 2020.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Frye, second by Mrs. DeBevick, to adopt ordinance number 153, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mrs. Fodor?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
And the first reading.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Resolution number 133, 2020, presented by Mrs. Angela, titled zoning permit moratorium. A resolution imposing a moratorium of no longer than 1 year on the issuing of zoning permits for entertainment device arcades, used car lots, in the warehouse, limited indoor storage, and adopt a motion for the city of Arlington and declare an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angela, second by Mrs. Copeland to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert,
Yes,
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that resolution 133, 2020 be adopted as presented.
Thank you, and Mrs. Copeland.
thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and second by Mrs. Coburn to adopt resolution number 133, 2020. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mrs. Gilbert,
Yes,
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mrs. Devitt,
Yes.
and the second reading.
Third reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Mayor,
Appointments.
I have two. The first one is for the Board of Health. Mary Jo Goss is a 5-year term, January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2025.
Okay, do I have a motion, Mr. Jaber?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like the motion for that.
Okay, and Mr. Griffin.
I'd like to second Mr. Jaber's, motion on, appointments.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Jaber and second by Mrs. Griffin to appoint Mary Jo Goss to the Board of Health for a 5-year term effective January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2025. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
The second one is for the Planning Commission. It's Mr. David Wynn, 4-year term effective January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2024.
Do I have a motion? Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion to appoint David Wynn to a 4-year term on the Planning Commission starting January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2024.
Thank you, and Mrs. Colbert.
thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second that motion to appoint David Wynn.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff, second by Mrs. Colburn to appoint David Wynn to the Planning Commission for a 4-year term effective January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2024. Are there any remarks? Mr. Heidrich.
Thank you, Mr. President. With communication from the mayor today, Mr. Nguyen has been serving since 2006. Another 4-year term would put him at 18 years on this commission. I do respect that he has the experience. The mayor has total faith in him. And I did communicate to the mayor that hopefully in the future, we will start cycling in some new faces and new ideas. I'm going to be voting yes on this appointment, but more reappointments for the Planning Commission, I'm going to seriously question with the length of their service. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm kind of going to piggyback off that. I would like to see a little bit more diversity in the Planning Commission instead of the same old faces. After all, they're the ones that make the regulations for businesses. With that said, I've been to plenty Planning Commission meetings, and Mr. Nguyen has been the one that I look to ask the questions that I would ask. So I just wanted to put that out there that I would like to see diversity, but Mr. Nguyen is definitely good for the job.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Mrs. Angela.
Yes, and we have to keep in mind that 14 years volunteering is a long time, and his heart is in the city. He loves the city, and he wants to do good for the city. So in order for him to decide to go another 4 years, he should be commended for that. Thank you.
Right. Anyone else? Well, him and his wife are both dedicated to the city. Keep trying to do the right thing, make sure people do the right thing. He is definitely the right man for this job. Okay, are there any other remarks? Mr. Griffin?
Thank you, Mr. President. I had the honor of operating the Salvation Army Kittle over the weekend. And we had a really good turnout. The weather was fine. I couldn't have done it
We
without.
have to vote on this.
Oh, it's all right.
Sorry.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Okay, Mr. Nguyen is back for 4 more years. Miscellaneous and unfinished business.
I have a new liquor license for Building Tomorrow LLC. It's a D1, D2, D3. 555 West Ford Avenue, Barberton, of course. A copy was given to Chief Morber, Mrs. Doherty, and Mrs. Fry, and I did receive an objection.
Okay, all right, has everybody been notified? About the rejection.
I have to send it back to you, Commissioner of Liquor Control.
Okay, all right. Okay, is there anything from the body here? Mr. Griffin?
Oh, thank you. Back to the Salvation Army. I had the pleasure of organizing the kettle collection Saturday, but I couldn't done it without my helper, Mr. Heidi, Mr. Jaber, and Mr. Greer. I mixed them in order as they came. He was number first, he was second. So we had a really good day. We took in over $600.
Wow.
And we filled the kettle up, and we had to order another one, but we filled it up because we couldn't poke it down anymore. We forgot to put the stick there to poke it down. And Mr. Jaber had a really good idea that he ran for his, you want to explain it to him?
We got a gift card from Leach's Meat and Sweets for $25. Anybody that donated, I gave them a raffle ticket, between 2 and 12 and 2. And it was a great turnout. People just went up and just won the raffle ticket and donated money. And we had Ernie Judge on the raffle ticket.
Okay.
He came pick up this morning. So it was a good turnout. Good time.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Okay, the mayor's not here. Any communications from somebody else for the mayor? Okay. With nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. DeBevick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick, second by Mr. Hyde, that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 6:45.
Come and get you.
Somebody got a fresh haircut over there. Look at you on DQ. He's trying to change his appearance. It's doing good. I'm trying to get a hold of him. Extend his car warranty.
I've had this coat for years. It's the first time it was cold enough for me to wear it here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.